Welcome to the University of Hong Kong Main Library, and my name is Peter Sidorko. This is a truly special seminar, and I think you're all here as book lovers and ancient script lovers. I really want to thank András Németh for offering to give the presentation today, and to Dr. Ofer Mansour from Fine Arts for facilitating his presence here. Palimpsests are new to me, but they are absolutely fascinating. This seminar, What Lies Behind Palimpsests, will have András providing us with an overview on the archaeology of palimpsests and the methods applied to recover erased texts via two famous Vatican codices. The only copy of Cicero's Republic, Platonic dialogue in Latin, that survives as an erased text from the 4th, 5th century, and underneath St. Augustine's commentary on the Psalms of the 7th century. The other palimpsest is a collection of several Greek historians from the 10th century that has challenged scholars for almost 200 years. So with this, I ask you to welcome András, and I hope you enjoy your talk.
Thank you so much for the hospitality and the nice opportunity to become here. I'm very happy, and I would like to especially thanks to the organizers of the library and Ofer, who helped me to bring this opportunity together, and also my friends, the Hungarian consul Paul Kertész, and his wife Esther, who cannot be here but will arrive a little bit later. And now I would like to begin. When I was thinking about what to offer you here today, which can be a shared interest with European humanist scholarship, with ancient objects and manuscripts, which cannot be found in Hong Kong. And the innovation, the technological part, which is very much developing in Hong Kong, and we are in desperate need, and in some ways we are attracting in the Vatican, in Europe. I thought that the palimpsests would be an ideal subject to present today. What are palimpsests? It's a difficult word. Maybe, I don't know if you heard about this word. These are recycled parchment manuscripts which had an ancient script on them. At a certain moment of time, the reader, the users, thought that these manuscripts include texts which are not interesting any longer, and they should be erased, and the parchment material should be reused and recycled. Just to understand economically why is it important and helpful to do this process, and at the same time to understand the technical difficulties to erase a text, I would like to explain the production of manuscripts and the difficulties that an ancient ink causes in a manuscript. First of all, the manuscripts from late antiquity, mainly from the 4th century on, in increasing matter, were written on parchment, skins, animal skins. The best quality was for sheepskin, but various other types of skins, goat or calf, was also used for this purpose. There is the pointer. Anyway, you see here how the animal skin is prepared for writing on it. The hair is removed with chalk, the surface is smoothed, then it's stretched, dried in a special way to make it flexible, then it's folded in a special way which creates normally with one animal 4 pieces or 4 sheets of animal skin parchment, and if it's folded, as you see in the bottom right corner, it creates a gathering of 4 bifolios which can be easily translated to the animal skin in this way. A normal normally, in medieval manuscripts, to look aesthetically beautiful, the flesh side faces the flesh side, and the hair side faces the hair side in the manuscript. And this principle was very carefully observed until, let's say, the 16th century, then forgotten. And at the end of the 19th century, it was rediscovered. And that's why it happens that in earlier 19th century restorations, the conservation people didn't know about this principle, and they restored the manuscripts in a way that hair side faces flesh side, and you can see that it's something wrong here. The other part of the story is the ancient ink. Ancient ink was different from today's ink. The late antique and medieval times, mostly the garnet was used, which is from oak tree, and it includes tannin. And if one creates ink from tannin and garnet and writes on parchment, the iron content of this ink gets in chemical reaction with the parchment, and because of the oxidation, the ink burns itself on the surface of the parchment, which means that it cannot be removed completely. So it cannot be erased. The only way to erase an ancient script is to scratch, to rub with a piece of stone, and physically thin the layer of the parchment. And this is what hasn't happened in the most of the time, and that's why it's possible to see ancient scripts and recover ancient scripts. On the image you see a scribe who is copying by hand a manuscript from another copy. Medieval times, in Europe there was no print. Each manuscript was produced by hand from another copy on expensive parchment. You can imagine the cost of animals. One gathering of 4 bifolios is equal with 1 animal. If we have a bulk, massive manuscript, it can be a flock. And it's not only the animal, the price of the animal, it's also the preparation, the skill of the scribe. It takes months, several months, to finish a manuscript for a single scribe. You have to know the language, the abbreviation system. It's a really complicated task to transfer everything, all information from manuscript to another manuscript. At the same time, you see an instrument which is used to erase scripts and make some corrections, because as today, if you make a mistake, you just throw the sheet away as a trash, but it was not possible those days. Here you see that a massive manuscript, this is a Western type of binding, and each of these horizontal layer is equivalent for one gathering, usually 4 bifolios, which is normally called in English quire, in Latin quaternio, is bound in a special way. So if you see a medieval manuscript, this corresponds to a flock. So it's very expensive and a long process. And you could add, as I told you before, the cost of the human resources, a scribe, a corrector, the illuminator, because these manuscripts were very frequently illuminated, illustrated, and also the binder who bound the manuscript in this way. And what happened? Palimpsests etymologically consist of 2 words. Both are from Greek. Panin means again, and psao means rub, to remove the script. Palimpsao, which means that rubbed again, smoothed again, which says the repetition of the process of cleaning the surface of the parchment. So if you recycle a parchment you can save the trouble of the parchment production until actually this phase. You don't need new animals, you don't need the complex preparation process of the parchment, and you only need to remove the ink. How it was possible? There are no real recipes from medieval times. It very frequently happened. Normally they used milk and some oat to make liquid, and it helped to make the script less strongly legible and visible, but not completely illegible. If you have these gatherings in a new manuscript, and the upper part shows, in this concrete example, very precise example, the St. Augustine's In Relationis in Psalmos, the commentary on the Psalms, 4 gatherings corresponding to the page numbering. You see that from these bifolios, observing the rule that hair side faces hair side, flesh side faces flesh side, at the same time observing the rule that the underscript should make comprehensible, continuous text, you can puzzle out another manuscript. And this is what happened in this case, and from this manuscript, which was copied around 700 in Bobbio, in a Benedictine monastery in Europe, which was founded by St. Columban, the Irish missionary, in 614, and in North Italy, and they gathered a large number of manuscripts, because of the cost of the production of the parchment, they were happy to find other ancient manuscripts from Italy, which were abundant, because Italy was from the late Roman Empire and later, they still had the manuscripts here and there from ancient times, who almost nobody could read, understand, appreciate, but the material was there, or present. So they offered themselves for easy recycling, and they did so. And that's why they reused it. And now the scholarly work is to use these principles to reassemble the one manuscript to another manuscript. As I told you, the upper text was copied in around 700. And the text was St. Augustine, Augustine's commentary on the Psalms. For a Benedictine monastery, for monks, the Psalms were very important in daily prayer, because in the holy offices, in the liturgy, they gathered 8 times a day, and they prayed. And the basic prayer were the Psalms, and each week this tradition became established a little bit after the time when this manuscript was copied. But the later principle was that the Psalms were repeated in weekly cycles, which means that 1 year each monk repeated the Psalms 52 times. So this was a text which they remembered very well, but not in the order of the Psalms, but in the order of the liturgy. So this was a basis of memory to which they could attach various pieces of information. And Augustine, who had a very complex theology, very well learned in ancient philosophy, in Neoplatonism, rhetorics. So he knew Greek philosophy perfectly, rhetoric perfectly. He could create a commentary on the Psalms, which summarized his very complex and rich theological, philosophical thoughts based on a line-per-line commentary on the Psalms, which was the most familiar text to the monks. That's why, for them, it was really important to copy. Because the collection of Psalms include 150 Psalms, it could be done only with 3 very bulky volumes. The volume which survives from St. Augustine includes the portion from Psalms 119 until 140. And with various, if we include the portions which were lost over the centuries, it would make up 200 folios, which is around this bulky. And the size is about this size. And the whole series would make up 3 very thick volumes like this. The other text, which was underneath, was the De Republica, the Republic, Marcus Tullius Cicero, the famous Roman rhetorician, politician. We can call him also philosopher, who lived in the very vibrant period of the 1st century BC, and not only talked about politics but made politics, and was still today regarded maybe the best ideal orator, person who wrote Latin. So everybody wants to imitate Cicero's Latin. So this is considered to be today the perfect Latin language is the Latin language which Cicero wrote. And this work consisted in 6 books. There is one portion of book 6, the dream of Scipio, the adopted son of the famous Scipio of the Punic Wars. And this son was actually the natural son of Aemilius Paulus, who conquered Greece. So actually, the Scipios are famous for expanding Roman power over the Mediterranean, because the grandfather won actually the Punic Wars, and the natural father of Scipio won the war in Greece, which had to enter Greece and the Macedonian Empire, including Asia Minor, a little bit longer process to Rome. At the same time, Scipio and his circle was famous of adopting Greek philosophy and thoughts, and created a circle which can be imagined, reconstructed on the basis of the circle of Socrates in Athens some 300 years before. And because Cicero wanted to create a language on the example of Greek literature, he wrote this dialogue as a Platonic dialogue between the participants of Scipio's circle, which took place in his villa in 129 before Christ. And in book 6, there is a story that the young Scipio, in young Scipio's dreams, appears his adopting grandfather, the older Scipio, and shows him the universe.
András?
Yes?
I know Italian culture
Sometimes
use their hands.
Okay. Maybe I live too long in Italy. Earlier I haven't used my hand. Now I was told that I'm speaking in my hand.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hope. Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, and I hope you understood me so far. I have to say I had a cold last week, and that's why I'm a bit afraid of shouting, because does it work? Maybe I can speak louder.
want to say soon.
Okay. Maybe it's better. So, how people know about Cicero's Republic until the early 19th century? Because it is a text which Cicero wrote, but nobody knew, let's say, after the 7th century. Macrobius, late 4th, early 5th century commentator of Scipio's Dream. So there was a portion which Macrobius used, commented on. And this portion took the section from Book 6 of Cicero's Republic, in which in the younger Scipio's Dream appears his adopting grandfather, the old Scipio, who won the Punic Wars against Hannibal, and shows him the universe. So, and this was the most important philosophical text in medieval times, in which the structure of the whole universe was explained and imagined. Describes not only the world, the various zones of the world, which was imagined as a globe. Because we believe, it's very often thought that medieval times they believe in a circle. It's actually not true. This is the center of the universe. So not the sun is the center of the universe, but the earth. But the earth is a globe, and it has zones with different climates, so perfectly known, and also the south hemisphere was imagined without explicit knowledge. And then the whole circles, the various planets, the sun, the Earth, the Venus, the Pluto, named after gods. So the complex system is described. And this was the text which was known from this. And this portion resembles the Dream of Air from Pamphylia in Plato's Republic. Because Cicero's model was basically Plato's Republic. And because this text was very famous and very well known, from Petrarch, from the Renaissance in Italy, everybody wanted to find this text. And in the 15th century, when ancient Roman literature models became models of usage and ideology, and when at the same time, coincidentally, Greek scholars from the fallen Eastern Roman Empire, the fall of Constantinople, brought manuscripts to Italy. Humanist scholars began to search for manuscripts in libraries. So they systematically searched, scrutinized old catalogs, old collections, and tried to identify new manuscripts. Actually, they did many of them, but they didn't succeed with the Cicero's Republic. But they tried. They kept searching and trying to find it, but they couldn't. And what happened is that the collection of Bobbio spread to 3 libraries, to Torino, Milan, and Rome, to the Vatican collection, and it was finally 1618 when one huge portion was donated Pope Paul V, and they were bound, very vaguely described and integrated in the library. And this image is from a section of Rome's map from 1593, and it shows the new St. Peter Basilica, which is not completely ready, because you see that the staircase is very different from the situation today, but the dome is ready and the new structure is already ready. And you see the courtyard. I don't know if you happen to be in Rome, but you see that it's very similar. And the library is located in that corridor in the central part. And it was actually built, founded by, in the mid, this is the bird view of Cortile del Belvedere, from above the Corte della Pigna, which is today the courtyard of the Vatican museums. So if you go there, you certainly go through. It's a huge courtyard with a moving globe in the middle. And the image shows the Sistine Chapel.
That's it, yeah.
Okay, so I'm trying to, how can I give the pointer? Up. Yeah, thank you. So this is the Sistine Chapel, and this is the Old Vatican Palace. And then Pope Nicholas V in the 450s founded the library. It was located here. And it was actually here until the end of the 16th century, when Pope Sixtus V would transfer the obelisk here from this point, which is somewhere here, created this part, and this is the library. And it's also here today, and this is the entrance to the library. This is the actual building. So when in 1618 the books arrived here, already the library was here, and how the library grew and grows until today, that it integrated donations to the Pope and collections of papal families. And this part, because it was a donation, it became part of the general collection of the Vatican. That's why it's called Vaticanus Latinus 5757, because this portion became part of the general collection. And it was, and this is the main, the Sistine Hall, the Salone Sistino, the main hall of the Vatican Library, also built and created, imagined by the architect Domenico Fontana, and the circle of Sixtus V, after the Tridentine Council, expressing the new ideology that the library collects all knowledge of Christianity, which can be used as a defense against the Reformation. And the books were located in these shelves, closed shelves, earlier times. So this text also arrived to this place, and after it was very vaguely described in the 17th century, nobody noticed that it included Cicero's Republic until 1819, when Angelo Mai from Milan arrived to the Vatican as a prefect, the director, I would say, in modern terms, the director of the Vatican Library. And he was very famous for deciphering ancient manuscripts and erased manuscripts. And he used chemicals as his earlier ancient colleagues used chemicals to remove the earlier text used chemicals to recover the erased text. And for this purpose, there were two recipes, and he used a recipe from gallnut ink, extracted with the help of wine and alcohol, and put with clean sponge on the surface of the parchment. And exactly, it was a very similar material which was used to make the ancient ink. And that happened because of this corrosion and oxidation, that the earlier ink, which was copied earlier, earlier, it more strongly was burned and chemically attached to the parchment than the lettering. And this liquid solved the lettering, and very often it happened that he managed to remove completely the upper text. But it was a little bit experimental procedure, and he was looking for new text, unpublished text, because he was mainly concerned of his own fame, because he wanted to be popular, famous. He wanted to demonstrate that I discovered important text, I published important text, and I'm a very good scholar, and he was actually very successful because he was very productive, really discovered important text. He systematically scrutinized manuscripts of Ambrosiana in Milan, in the Vatican. We have his manuscripts, and there are lists with shelf marks and indications what are the texts. And I saw some of these manuscripts in the Vatican, and you see the traces of these chemical trials and his notes that he identifies the text, and when he sees that the text is already published and well known, and for him not so interesting, he stops the decipherment. On the other hand, when he sees that something is very interesting and very promising, he continues the decipherment. And when it's very difficult to uncover, he uses more of this gallic acid ink, and the result is that the manuscript is burnt, because as the old ink burns itself in the manuscript and the script becomes dark, in a similar manner, his intervention, the ink, makes the parchment black, dark, like a carbon. So in some ways carbonize it. So it's very destructive for the parchment and creates a lot of troubles for modern conservators. And what he could see in the 1920s and his colleagues in the 30s and 40s cannot be seen today. Scholars already in the 1860s described that in their editions that these manuscripts are already black, illegible, and blames him for making these chemical reactions. At the same time, there are letters from famous Western, German, and other scholars saying that, oh, I cannot read this and other page, please use chemical treatments which are not damaging the manuscripts. I have to say that the Vatican didn't authorize these requests. So it's very controversial because the enthusiasm, the scholarly enthusiasm, sometimes creates, how would I say, very problematic reactions. But what he did, what he saw actually, go back a little bit, was this one. You see this little dark background. This is the bifolio of Augustine's commentary on the Psalms, with the beginning, one of the Psalms with the illustration of Pi, of P, with the bird. So it was made around 700 in Bobbio, in the Irish monastery. So you see here the smaller text, which is a semi-uncial script from that period, and this is Augustine's text. But it was not so difficult to see that there is something else on that. This is an ultraviolet photograph which makes the underneath text a little bit more legible, and this clearly shows that this text is a Republic. There's a certain point when the first book finishes, and it's written there that De Republica incipit liber secundus. So actually, this is one of the easiest palimpsests, one of the easiest to recover and see. So Angelo Mai was just lucky that nobody checked this manuscript before, and he managed to find the most interesting text, which brought him a huge fame until the mid-1840s. So he discovered this text at the very end of 1819. So in 25 years, there are 45 scholarly publications on this text. In the mid-19th century, several editions, and this is the period when the Vatican Library was not open for scholars. So you had to have special arrangements, favors, connections to have access. But still, scholars were so interested in this text that this number shows that it was really famous. Poets wrote. Now, Pardi, famous Italian poet, wrote a long poem to praise Angelo Mai for his very important discovery of this manuscript. So this was his major discovery. Yes. And I told you the story of the Vatican, Angelo Mai, and a couple of decades later, we arrive to the modern history of the Vatican Library. And when Pope Leo XIII opens the library for scholars, both the library and the archives, which are two institutions. If you see the building, this is the main entrance for scholars to the library, and this is for the archives here. So they are next to each other, and the archives was separated. The secret archives, which means not very mysterious, but secreto because separate from the library and separate collection which relates to the Vatican state. The library also has archives which is not related to the Vatican state or the papal state, but related to the history of the family. So we have family archives within the library. This is the principle of the division. So continuing the story, that after the library was opened, one of his famous first prefect was Franz Irle, a German Jesuit, whose main contribution, one of his main contribution to the history of books and book production was actually that he invented or established book conservation. Because when he arrived to the Vatican, he realized that there are tens of thousands of books, and some of them in very bad condition. So something should be done with them, because the responsibility of an institution like a library to conserve the manuscripts and make them available to scholarship, interested, prepared scholars. And this statement actually was already written in the mid-15th century in the founding document of the library. And since that time, the library, so this is actually a document which in the 15th century created the institution of a public library, which is not available only to the owner, to the Pope, but also to the interested public, which those days were mostly ecclesiastical people in the very beginning, but later to any scholars who just went there. And this became an institution. And Irle saw the problems with the manuscript. But he thought that he created an international collaboration, and the conference which he organized was made in 1898 in Switzerland, in St. Gallen. And from all around the world, mostly for Europe and the United States, the directors of major libraries convened and discussed the problems, difficulties, challenging of book restoration. And in the story of book restoration, this manuscript, the Republic of Cicero, was very important for two reasons. Reason one, that in many other cases, the situation was much worse than with the Republic of Cicero, because the pages which Angelo Mai treated with Gallic ink became really dark. And the situation became worse and worse continuously. And to demonstrate the problem, he brought some of the leaves of Cicero's Republic and other manuscripts to demonstrate his point. And he suggested the use of gelatin, which today is not applied, to fix the fragmented pieces of the manuscript and prevent it for deterioration, so that stabilize the actual situation. The other and most challenging aspect was the use of photography for conservation purposes, because today more or less scholars agree that a good way of conserving manuscripts is to photograph them. Enables share the photographs with scholars all around the world, and prevent the conserved material to restricting access to the original objects. And after, already in the mid-19th century, photography began to be applied to photograph manuscripts, but the idea to use it conservation purposes and to create very close and precise copies of the original manuscripts from photographs normally coincides with the period at the end of the 19th century. There are correspondence between Van Rieu, the Dutch scholar, and he was the director of the University Library of Leiden, and he was the scholar actually who edited the text of the Republic of Cicero and studied the original manuscript in the 1850s in Rome. And he saw very well the difficulties, how difficult to access the original manuscripts, and how important it would be to use a technology to help the conservation of the material, at the same time access to important manuscripts. And he wrote a letter to Erle to invite him to an international collaboration of big libraries, which would create a consortium to apply exclusively academic criteria to define manuscripts and make very precise photographic reproductions. Erle did choose finally the way of the Vatican, but he shared the principle, and the Vatican began to publish his own facsimile editions, and the Republic of Cicero was part of this project. But the difficulty was the two scripts, how to make this legible with photography, the András script. And already in the 1890s, solutions were offered to solve this problem. And in those days, the wet plate camera was used with glass plates. This is the old photography. And if you make a darker and lighter light, different lights, different glass plate photography, and geometrically you put these two plates together, there's a way to make the upper script illegible and the lower script legible on the other, or the other way around, to distinguish the two. And this method was used, so invented in the 1890s, and was used at the beginning of the 20th century. And there was the Istituto dei Palimpsesti, the Institute of Palimpsests, in Rome, by Giuseppe Perucci in the early 1920s. And this is an example that the famous manuscript of Gaius, the lower in Verona, which actually Angelo Mai also studied before coming to the Vatican, and how it's possible to distinguish between the upper and the lower script. This is the same sheet, there's the same page, and you see that on the right side there is the lower script, which is Gaius. the lawyer, 3 centuries older than the other one, and here you see the upper script with its dark sections, which shows the gallic aciding and the chemical intervention. Okay. This is an image that later on the ultraviolet light, different strengths of ultraviolet light and fluorescent light was invented and used to differentiate between scripts. And this was used actually in the Vatican in 1942. And now, to continue the story, I would switch on the other manuscript, which is more close to me because I wrote my doctoral thesis in this project. I tried to be short because I could speak about this forever, but I won't. I don't take up your time. This is, I would say, at least as important manuscript as the Republic of Cicero, but much less famous and much more difficult to read and much more challenging. And maybe I'm a bit biased about this. In the 10th century, Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the Emperor Constantine VII figured out that it would be nice to create a kind of practical encyclopedia of whole preceding historical experience. And how he wanted to realize his ambitious plan, he collected the most important pieces of historiography, which was written in Greek and covered the larger part of history, especially those periods from which he wanted to learn lessons. And these periods were broader than the periods which were interesting for Byzantine historiography those times. So it covered Republican period, it covered Greek city period, it covered late antiquity in a very detailed way, and concerned many historians which later generations didn't think important, and simply they don't survive. So the strangeness of this collection, that from the 26 historians which survive in this collection, 2/3 survive only here. So it's a collection of unique historical fragments, but in a very disordered way. Because he created 53 thematic topics. And from these 53 topics, only 5 survive. One of them is on virtues and vices. And this folio is from a 10th century manuscript, which was probably copied, very likely copied for the emperor himself, or a little later, as part of this project. And this is how it looks like without erasure, in its perfect condition and illumination. The others, like on the gnomic statements, which is in the Vatican, and the other manuscripts I'm just now talking about, which is a palimpsest. Here the folios, which were illuminated, including gold, including blue, created difficulties for recycling. That's why these folios were thrown away. We don't know systematically these folios. From the others, we know a portion. And the other 3 collections on ambushes and on embassies of the Romans to the foreigners and foreigners to the Romans. We have evidence from 16th century transcripts of these manuscripts. But within the collections, in these 5, from various sections, various points, there are cross-references in the gaps, and where other texts can be found. can explain it very briefly how it works. It's very complicated, but not so to the point of palimpsest. This is to show the variety of subjects. It's about related to the emperor, on inauguration, succession, on Caesars, marriages, ambushes, warfare, diplomacy, leading the army, victory, defeat, transformation, defeat into victory, battles, public speeches, geography, customs, peoples, settlements, politics, church, leisure, literary genres. So they extracted literary pieces embedded in historiography, like letters, epigrams. There are many oracles, which are in historical works, mythological stories, and wise economic statements, and various moral aspects. So this is roughly half of the 53 collections. And what they did, they choose a piece, and they copied the section to another manuscript which collects only one subject. And later on, they created an index system, and they could easily find up the relevant topic with personal names. It was possible to use it as an encyclopedia. But for later scholars, modern scholars, it was not interesting as an encyclopedia, but it was interesting as a collection of historical texts. Again, I'm speaking about the duplication of interests, because ancient periods, the interest focus was different, and our focus is different again. What modern scholars wanted to do with this text is to recover the lost historians. Polybius is the most famous example, because he described how Rome conquered the universe in 53 years, and probably this is the principle of the number of the collections which made it 53. And Polybius wrote 40 books. From the 40 books, only 5 survives complete. 18 survive in averaged epitomes, and everything else, including the full text of the epitomes, survive only in this collection of the excerpts. And you see here longer other lists, like Diodor, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, Arrian, Appian, Cassius Dio, and so on. Most of these authors have huge portions which survive only here. One of them is Dexippus, from the 3rd century. And this is a portion from Peter Patrician, another historian, and it shows how the 2 scripts relates one to the other. And as you see, the difficulty is that the later script, which in this case is underneath, because this green is the digital superscript of what is visible from the earlier script. So they completely cover each other. And with photographic technology, it's almost impossible to distinguish, because the ink is the same. If you remember, go back to this manuscript, the 2 scripts are very different, so it's very easy to distinguish between the 2. But if you see this one, you see it's almost impossible. This is how this folio looks today. So this is the result of Angel Mai's intervention with some gelatin treatment which stabilized the situation, but it's not so easy to read. Complicated the problem that the 2 scripts are superimposed on the other. And actually that's why Angel Mai used so much of this gallic acid ink, because he wanted to solve completely the upper script, to be able to read the underscript, because the upper script was Plato's Gorgias and Aelius Aristides' speeches. Very common text, very known text, really not interesting for an editor. but the underneath text was completely new, unpublished. And what can we do today with modern technology? And this is the example of this page that the latest editor, the Dutch Boswam, wrote that 22 versus Leginek found, which means that 22 lines is impossible to read. He simply couldn't edit this portion. And this image was taken this September, actually 2 months ago, in the Sala Barberini at the Vatican Library, when Mike Todd, an American scholar of Hungarian origin, made multispectral photography of the difficult pages, some of the difficult pages of this manuscript. And the idea is to use a phase 1 camera, and you see the 2 other lights, and without moving the manuscript, with complete, camera oscura, a completely dark position, the manuscript is lit with different line combinations and length of time, without changing the position. And photographs are taken with a computer program. You can compare the pixels of the same point, and with various trials and combinations you can increase the differences, and you can make it more legible. And this is what happened. And this is one of the sheets, one page, and the other is the result. And to make the story half happy end, and demonstrating my point that difficulties generate innovation, innovation generate difficulties, and difficulties again generate innovation and make the world progress. It's an ambivalent situation, but this is what happened in this case. The fact that Angelo Mai happened to remove the upper script opened the window to this multiplexers technology to recover the underscript, because it managed to distinguish, to remove the black layer caused by the chemical intervention and make the text pretty well legible, as you see on the image. But if the treatment hasn't been made, like in this case, it wouldn't be possible. There are many other examples that there are other technology like there is also the infrared light and also the Röntgening technology. But it's difficult because you have to put the manuscript in a special place, which normally collections don't allow, and they are not happy with. And in this case, you can read, as far as I heard, more layers of text underneath. So it happens also with carbonized papyri, that it's possible to read 2 or 3 layers underneath without rolling out the papyrus. So actually, this technology seems to solve a solution for the chemical treatments. And this will be the end of my talk, and I'm very happy to answer your questions. And I wanted to show the ambivalence of scholarly enthusiasm, damages, innovations, and how difficulties promote progress in a very ambivalent way. And thank you very much for your kind attention.
So we do have some time. Yes, Julie.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. When Angelo Mai was looking to find the underneath text,
Yes.
did he take care to ensure that the on top text was also preserved?
Depending on the text. I think he was careful to apply his own judgment of. He was careful in applying his own judgment on the text. In this case, Augustine text is the most ancient version of the commentary on the Psalms. Because it's very ancient and the Republic was very well legible, he tried to make a compromise, but on the pages when the Cicero's Republic was not so well legible, he made the situation worse. So it depended on the on page by page and his judgment of the importance between the two texts. But he was not systematic of destroying all the upper text on the favor of the underneath text, but he as far as I see, he applied the method according to his own judgment of the text. It can be relative to the upper text and lower text, because sometimes there are only small portions on the page which you see the treatment. But he was careful to the extent to make the most necessary intervention. But if he found the underneath text very important and interesting, he was very decisive of removing the upper text. We see examples for all cases. Yes.
I have a follow-up question. So today, if somebody was working on a palimpsest, would they take care to preserve all the layers of text, do you think?
I try to do that, but it's an interesting story that my experience that scholars normally focus on one part and ignore the other part. So they are selective. It's true for the palimpsests, and it's also true for the last project, which I mentioned, the Constantine excerpts. You see a Byzantine 10th century interesting approach to treatment of texts, and you see ancient fragments of historical texts, and it's very difficult to integrate the two different viewpoints. And those who study the fragments are really not interested in the 10th century approach, and the same is applicable to the palimpsests. Those who are interested in the underneath text are really not interested in Augustine. Those who are interested in Augustine not interested in the underneath text. But because in this case there are also a publicity aspect, that this manuscript is not Augustine, it's Cicero. But they are both physically the same object. And the editors of Augustine, who use the philological method, the stemmatic method, to create a stemma and edit the text, a certain criteria, with this method they need to choose manuscript as a base and correct the mistakes of the manuscript on the basis of other variants, the principle of corruption of texts. And because this late 7th century manuscript doesn't fit in the stemma, because it's very independent, very old, very ancient, and of course not perfect, there are mistakes, and it's not complete because there are many sections missing. It doesn't fit the stemma. And what they did, they indicate some reading variants, but they don't use it for the edition. That is the most ancient text, so it just doesn't fit the scholarly method. So my point is that there are scholarly methods and principles that are the objects, and normally scholars see the objects through their scholarly methods and principles and ignore everything else.
Is it always the case that there are only two layers, or
there are 3 layers? It happens more frequently. The Vatican, there was a very important discovery in 2002, around 2002. It's a 3-layer palimpsest. This is Vaticanus Syriacus 623, and here the upper text is a 9th century Syriac text, I think hagiography, saints' lives. The underneath text, the 2nd layer, is a 6th century, I think, medical text in Greek, and the next layer is late 4th century Menander. This is the interesting discovery that Menander, the famous new comedian from Athens, his texts survive only in papyri from Egypt. Because Egypt, recycling again, after papyri became out of use, sometimes they use the other side for other purposes or just throw them away. And there are big trash blocks accumulated in Egypt in the desert, where because of lack of humidity and water, they are very well preserved. And when the excavations began in Egypt in the, let's say, second half of the 19th century, local people used it for heating, because it was very produced heat, and scholars were horrified that these precious objects are used for heating, and they began systematically dig this material, and they found interesting pieces, and Menander was very popular actually, and they survive also in scrolls and also in codices, which means that both sides are written. But so far there was no evidence that Menander survived in parchment codices, because in a transition in the 4th century. And this Vatican discovery, which was a 3-layer palimpsest, the lower layer was a very tiny script, 2 canons, this size of a page, Menander text. And how do we know that is Menander? Because it includes 2 comedies, and one portion is a known comedy from Menander, and the other portion is an unknown comedy. So it's possible even today to discover very important new texts, and it happens that it's 3-layered, but I don't know example about more than 3. I have no other examples of 3, but this is the most important, interesting one. Other questions?
Can you tell us a little bit more about how modern technology helps to reveal the lower layers?
In the Vatican, so it's always a challenge, because technology cannot read the manuscripts.
Yeah.
You have to be a scholar who knows the language, the script. But technology can help scholars, so it's a collaborative project. You need a technician, technical expert, and you need a scholar. So it's an important aspect that it needs a dialogue, communication, an acceptance of other skills, that we are not perfect alone, but we are better if we collaborate. This is a very important premise. The other important premise is that it should be found a method which doesn't harm the object. It's not good for the object if it's photographed many times. And because technology develops very fast, the most important objects are photographed over and over again. It doesn't have conservation. So it's contrary to the interest of conservation. Again, a bit similar to Angel May's chemical treatment, not so bad, but still should be considered. So a task for the technical part is to invent a method which doesn't harm the object. In the terms of photography, it would be nice to create very good quality base images. And that's why multispectral imaging is a good example, because in one position it creates really high number of sheets which can be over positioned, and with a program it can be combined in different ways and different results can be achieved. For the scholarly part, different scholars ask different questions. For a philologist, it's important to read the text. For a conservation expert, it's important to distinguish where the gelatin were, how the chemical treatments harm the object. So everybody has different questions. So my answer would be to the challenge is to create raw material with modern technology, which enables to satisfy the higher number and most different questions by different experts without harming the object. I don't know if it gives you an answer. This is a more challenge which cannot be solved, but there's a struggle to approach it.
I just wanted to ask, how significant and what kind of effect do you think that recent advances in material analysis and in digital photography are going to be? Can we expect or hope that there will be further new textual discoveries of the kind that mine was aiming for? Or are we going to see progress in more kind of refined and accurate editions and more accurate material analysis of particular manuscripts instead? What do you think is going? Where do you think the new technology is going to take the field in over the next few years?
I think this higher progress can be expected from the objects which are already known. The space is very little to discover major important things. It's not impossible, it happens, but rarely accidentally, mostly in private collections. But in my view, the potential of already known objects are very much underestimated. So it's really, this is an example. My American friends and colleagues came to the Vatican to make multispectral photography for 2 days. They specified six pages to photograph. And from these 6 pages, 3 included portions where the text was illegible and earlier editors couldn't solve the problem. They made a digital multispectral photography and now the text became more legible. I haven't continued study. There are various projects in Vienna, so we are working to collaboratively to make better editions and decipher the text. But first you need to know the complex process of these excerpts to identify which are the pages, because it takes a lot of time. But if I identify the pages where the text is illegible, I cannot do more. But then comes the communication. So if communication works well between technicians and scholarly experts, I think major solutions and improvements can be done. And scholarly experts know the known material, they don't know the unknown material. It's again the communication. If something suspicious shows up in the market, in auction houses, in small collections, when less experts people that it can be potentially interesting, I think communication and collaboration is very important to connect different expertise, people with different expertise. So I would emphasize the most challenging part is communication, and it's less easy than it seems. And technology helps only through good communication. Without communication, technology is very weak and alone.
Okay, and last questions. Well, please join me in thanking András Németh. That was a truly engaging presentation. Thank you.
Nagyon jó volt már. Ne viccelj.
Én köszöntöm nektek.
Ja?
Kihangsúlyozom, hogy a másik amerikai magyar.
Élvezték, nem?
Nem most így májkoknak hívják a fotót. Yes, thank you so much for being.
Bye, thank you.
Hi, very nice to meet you.
Alicia Weisberg.
Nice to meet you. Pleasure. Great. Thank you very much for coming. It was really. I somehow thought that it's 11:30. I don't know why.
I'm sorry, I got you there in the nick of time.
You told me 12 o'clock, so I arrived at 12 o'clock.
We got you.
Yes. But I suspected I had half an hour more
Thanks.
to begin. But anyway.